Back to
Back
basics.
to basics. 6 years in, I think it's time that we revisit some of the most basic core principles of a good, safe, satisfying birth. So, way back when we first started the podcast, episode number 9 in 2020, we did Birth Planning 101, the most evidence-based methods for your safest, most satisfying birth. I actually listened to that episode this morning, and I was delighted by how excellent it was.
Really?
I expected to be like, oh my gosh, really?
Cringing.
We've learned a lot in 6 years of podcast recording, but it
Yes.
really was very good. So if
Good.
you haven't listened to that, you might want to go back and start with episode number 9. But I think it's time to revisit this in the current stage of birth. And I know we have a lot to add and expand on. So here we are with birth planning 2.0, or whatever we want to call this.
Okay.
So the key thing to first understand is that there are 2 models of care in birth. There is the obstetrical model and there's the midwifery model. We obviously fall pretty squarely into supporting the midwifery model of care, but I think it's important to just revisit what the distinction is. The main distinction is that in the midwifery model of care, we come from a perspective of viewing birth as normal and healthy, a normal, healthy physiologic process that sometimes goes off course. And that's why we have skilled care providers there to help and support and guide and direct when something is becoming a complication or redirecting a variation of normal. The other model of birth, the obstetrical model of care, views birth as basically a pathologic event that sometimes goes right. That birth is inherently prone to problems, that it needs to be managed, that it needs to have protocols, that it needs to be intervened with in order to go right most of the time.
Right. The only caveat, the only thing that's giving me pause is I don't want women to ever hear this discussion and think OB bad, midwife good. And the reason I say that is that there is overlap. If you think of these 2 circles, there's overlap. There are wonderfully supportive evidence-based OBs. I do think they are few and far between, particularly because they must practice in the medical model of care and they have to adhere to revenue targets in most hospitals, and they have administrators who are down there, watching over their shoulders. And those are the ones with the best intentions. And I do think that it's rare, but I also, and I think this is my bigger point, I'm endlessly surprised and disappointed in how medical so many midwives have gotten. Just in the past few days, I've seen this. I have a client in California who's planning a home birth, who has totally normal blood pressure, high protein in the urine. And her home birth midwife said, I won't attend your birth. You have to go in for an induction, and panic at the end of her pregnancy. And the midwife is basically leaving her and saying, you have to birth in the hospital. And even ACOG says high protein in urine alone is not a reason for induction. Just before this recording today, I received a message from someone who said she conceived via IVF, and her midwife is saying hard stop induction at 39 weeks because we don't want the placenta to die. So I just midwives.
This isn't black and white saying that
Right.
OBs are bad and midwives are good by any means. It is just simply the distinction between how providers are educated.
Correct.
The obstetrical model of education is rooted in the premise is basically all the things that can go wrong with birth and how to fix them, which we need. We need providers who understand that, because things do go off course in birth and you do need to know how to correct it. And the midwifery model of care is meant to be based in the natural, normal physiology of birth. So midwives are trained to trust birth differently. That doesn't mean that an individual practitioner necessarily practices that way. You can have great OBs who truly understand the physiology of birth. And we've seen this more and more, as you just said, the midwives out there who are becoming much more medicalized. That's certainly true.
And what you're saying is actually certainly true, because when ACOG was established many, many decades ago, they made a conscious decision. The board made a decision as to how obstetricians would practice in the United States, and they opted for AML, active management of labor. Unfortunately, that changed everything when they made that decision. They opted against expectant management of labor. So it's not just our opinion, what Tricia is saying. This is actually factual. They, in fact, study and practice AML, and they don't study and practice expectant management, which is what midwives do practice. So, all right, well, that's our basis for the conversation. And worldwide, the research is clear that the safest births are on the side of midwives when you look at global statistics. So yes, there's tons of merit to that. I just want women to know your work is always difficult. You always have to interview the person very, very well. And it's not as easy as saying, well, I'm going to have a midwife, decision made. You have to really get to know the person and constantly evaluate them through all your prenatals to make sure that they remain the right provider for you. So you don't end up in a crisis at the end where they do this about face over something that isn't even evidence-based. So it happens.
Well, that is why we are going to talk about the evidence-based methods of care that are over and underutilized. Because regardless of whether you're with a midwife or an OB, a lot of these methods are being way overused, and many of these methods are being significantly underused. They both have evidence to be supportive of labor or to be harmful to labor, and they're being both over and underutilized. So once you understand these concepts, that can help you to figure out if your provider, whether they're a midwife, home birth midwife, nurse midwife, or OB, aligns with these evidence-based methods.
And I know we have a ton to cover, so we've got to move.
Yeah, we got to get going.
Yeah, there's a lot to share.
This could be a 3-hour episode.
And we're going to make sure it's not.
You don't want a 3-hour episode? Come on.
Nobody wants a 3-hour episode. One person in the world gets away with that. His name is Joe Rogan. Nobody else shall dare.
What the heck? His episodes are like 6 hours long.
Only if he feels like talking that long, then he will do it. He does whatever the heck he wants. And, you know,
Huberman's like that too. He goes on and on.
Oh, his are always 3 hours. But you know what? Huberman repeats himself over and over. And I'm all for like a little bit of repetition, but he truly restates things 6 different ways. And I'm like, I got it. You had me like the second time. Yeah.
Well, we're going to be efficient here today.
Yep.
So let's begin with the most obvious, easiest, and truly incredibly underutilized, evidence-based, supportive. I don't want to call it an intervention because it's not an intervention. It's a supportive measure in birth. That is oral nutrition and hydration. Drinking and eating in labor. This is so simple. And so underutilized. I know you have a lot to say about this.
I have so much to say about that. Yes. And it sounds like such a boring, like I always think half the women listening are like, next, let's get to the next one. We need to talk about this one. There's so much information on the drinking alone. When you research how hydrated a woman is versus who's not well hydrated, if you read the research on that, it's like you want to reach for the nearest liter of, healthy fluid, coconut water, whatever it is, and drink.
Women in labor in hospitals for years and years and years have been labeled NPO, or basically nothing by mouth. I mean, how absurd is that to take away their ability to hydrate? Ice chips only, maybe a popsicle if you're lucky. And you're going to get a slap on the hand if you sneak a saltine cracker throughout labor. But how do we expect the body to go through this incredibly demanding physiologic process without feeding and fueling it? And the concern used to be basically that if you had to have an emergency cesarean section and required general anesthesia, that you had, risk of aspiration from having food in the stomach.
And this came from the days where women were given general anesthesia by rote. This is how women birthed for a couple of decades in the United States. Those were the days that the American Association of Anesthesiologists came up with that. And they just kept it for years.
That's right.
Without justification.
Now the modern reviews, including a major Cochrane review, find no justification whatsoever for restricting fluids or food in low-risk labors. So restricting food can lead to ketosis, meaning that, your body starts burning fat for fuel, which can lead to maternal exhaustion and potentially longer labors, and the failure to progress diagnosis, because, of course, your body runs out of fuel and stamina and energy to keep this going if we aren't feeding and fueling it. So our advice is you bring your own, if you're giving birth in the hospital, you bring your own food. You hydrate, you eat at will. You do not worry about hospital policy, because in many hospitals, this is still the policy. If you're giving birth at home, your midwife is going to be forcing food upon you, usually.
Yeah, and if you're in a hospital, you don't sneak the food. I really have feelings around this. I've heard things from women like, oh, my doula was nice enough to sneak me food. And I feel like, yeah, that's great. I mean, I'm not knocking it, but I just want to shake it up a little bit. In my mind, that's two unempowered women conspiring together. This woman has the right to eat, full stop. She can sit there and order steak and potatoes and a piece of pie if she wants, and sit there tall in her bed with a fork and knife if she wants. No one can stop her from eating. And the notion of a doula sneaking food, yes, it's like she's feeding her client, but they should both stand tall and say she needs food. And the research shows that a woman in labor needs the equivalent of a marathon runner as far as caloric intake and nutrition and energy. So you should stand tall in taking care of yourself. And if you're a doula, you should stand tall in taking care of your clients. This whole idea of hiding around it is just perpetuating the abuse, perpetuating these ridiculous policies. So, I mean, can I go on, Trisha, with this?
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
So I just want to add that in November of 2015, the American Association of Anesthesiologists, this is 10 years ago now. I remember this.
11.
11 year coming, yeah, November will make it 11 years. They came out with a press release that not only said women should be allowed to, their press release clearly states, and you can look it up on the internet right now, everybody, that women benefit. This was in the headline, benefit from small meals. And they included sandwiches and things like that. They're still being careful and they still have their little language. Check with your provider. No, you don't need to check with your provider. The research is clear. And another thing, last thing I have to say about this, Trisha, is another risk of depriving a woman or of foregoing your right to food and fluid in labor is also fetal distress. It's not just prolonged labor. It's not just a less efficient labor. It's also fetal distress. So it's what your body needs.
Okay, the next one. So the second very underutilized supportive measure in labor that is evidence-based is the use of intermittent fetal monitoring as opposed to continuous fetal monitoring. So this is a big one. This means that we are not constantly listening to the baby's heartbeat. Continuous fetal monitoring means that you have a strap on you and there's a strip and every little blip and beep of the baby's heart rate is recorded. And then it's evaluated all the time for variations that might be abnormal, always kind of looking for the problem in the heart rate. Whereas intermittent auscultation or intermittent monitoring is short blips of time, usually every 15 minutes or so, where you're listening to the baby with a handheld Doppler or even sometimes a fetoscope, which is an old-fashioned stethoscope for listening. Well, I shouldn't even say old-fashioned. Yeah. Still used, but
you'd think it was old-fashioned with how rarely it's used now.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's what was used before we had the modern technology. So I guess it is a little old-fashioned. But you're listening to the baby's heart rate intermittently and ensuring that it sounds within the normal range of beats per minute. And, accelerations when the baby moves and lack of decelerations or prolonged decelerations, which is a decrease in the heart rate. So the evidence is supportive that for low-risk pregnancies and labors, intermittent auscultation is just as safe or safer as continuous monitoring for the baby. I would say safer. I think when we get into the evidence on continuous fetal monitoring, we're going to find that it's safer.
The research actually says that. And I only say that, Trisha, because we interviewed Amy Romano, author, midwife, CNM, Amy Romano, in January of 2021. She did a recording with us. It was her second episode with us, I believe. And she talked about that research, how globally it is safer to have intermittent auscultation. It's a little counterintuitive, as you know, Trisha, because women sometimes say to you, well, isn't it better if they're always listening so they can catch every little thing, right? And what do you say to that?
We don't want to catch every little thing. We don't want to know when the baby squeezes their cord and then releases it and get hypersensitive that there's a problem. What we do know is that intermittent auscultation significantly reduces the risk of unnecessary C-sections and instrumental births. So that is why it is technically considered safer. Now, the problem is determining what is a low risk labor and what is a high risk labor. So that's where the gray area is. And it's very easy to be moved from the low risk labor into the high risk labor. If you are being induced or you have Pitocin, then continuous monitoring is more appropriate because now we are introducing a non-physiologic process into the birth process.
And an epidural, definitely.
Yes.
Yeah. Like I always say to my clients, look, if you opt for an epidural, we want to be reasonable here. This is no reason now to get hell bent on any other aspect. If you're opting for an epidural, now allow them to manage the risk of the epidural, and that would include continuous electronic fetal monitoring. That does make sense, and that is safer for you. But if you're looking at the woman having a physiologic birth, it is not safer to have the continuous monitoring.
And obviously, when we're giving birth at home, we have no such thing as continuous monitoring. Everything is by hand and intermittent.
Tricia, how do midwives at home decide how often to check the heart rate?
So there's a protocol basically for intermittent monitoring, which is about every 15 minutes in active labor and every 5 minutes in the second stage of labor when you're pushing.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have concerns, you might be listening for longer or more frequently toward the end.
Okay.
Okay, so number 3, highly underutilized, very effective, evidence-based method of supporting physiologic birth and transition is immediate skin-to-skin contact after birth. Now, this has improved. This has finally come more into standard routine practice in hospital birth, but not enough. It's not taken seriously enough because it is so incredibly important. And once again, if there's one single little worry about the baby, the skin to skin is quickly interrupted when the reality is, and the evidence is, that keeping the mother and the baby together is better for the baby. There is no baby warmer, there is no incubator on this planet that is better for the baby than the baby's mother. And we're still taking babies and mothers apart after birth, even if they just need a mild intervention.
Women have to stop thinking about this as a nice to have and thinking about it as a must have. Because from the baby's perspective, even from your perspective physiologically, but from the baby's perspective postpartum, it is a must to be on the mother. No matter what else is going on, the baby needs to be in contact with the mother. And contact means skin to skin. And for too long, we think of this as a nice to have. Oh, that would be nice. That would be all natural and sweet if you can, if possible. And they truly treat it like, I don't know, kind of like a non-issue. They just handle the baby, do their thing. I remember asking my doctor about this years ago. I didn't birth with her, but when I was planning to, I remember she's like, no, you get your baby for a while. Then we need to take the baby and do our things. I look back and I feel so mad about that. Like, no, you don't ever get to take my baby. I
Right,
can't
we
even
have to
believe I sat there
actually
and listened to that. It's just crazy, but that's how we're led to believe. That's how we're spoken to.
we actually have to start looking at it as harmful to the
Yes.
baby, because
Yes.
it is actually harmful to their physiology and to their neural imprinting to separate a mother and baby after birth. And we're not just talking about 1 hour. We're not just talking about this golden hour. Mothers and babies should be kept in continuous skin to skin contact for as long as possible after birth. So the evidence shows that immediate skin to skin contact regulates the baby's heart rate. It regulates their breathing. It regulates their temperature more effectively than any mechanical warmer ever could. And it stabilizes their blood sugar. How many babies are taken to the NICU for low blood sugars? And then once they get in the NICU, they're trapped in there. Getting them out of there is like breaking out of prison.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
I recently had a mother and baby who her baby was kept there for 7 days because her baby's blood sugar was like 1 point off from
Well, they
normal.
come up with reasons not to release the baby. We did a whole episode
Every
on
day.
this. Yeah.
Every day. One more day.
Yeah.
One more day. They were holding her baby hostage
100%.
over nothing. And also, she wasn't able to be skin to skin because they're very restrictive about how much contact you can have with the baby. And of course, once she finally demanded being skin to skin and spent 24 hours with the baby skin to skin, the blood sugar stabilized, the baby was fine, and she was able to get out.
I so often have the thought when I hear these stories, and I've heard stories like this thousands of times, I so often have the thought, like, I picture these providers and I keep thinking, you shouldn't be in the business of working with babies. You don't belong working with babies. You don't understand babies. And I often have the thought about women. You don't belong in the business of tending to women. Even female providers, I have said that about. You don't belong in the business of tending to women. If you don't understand women and their bodies and their needs and their emotions and what they need from you as a provider, first and foremost, before your experience, if you don't have an emotional intelligence and an awareness of your client, you don't belong working with women. There's probably another line of work that's better for you. But too often we have people in this industry who they're just there for different reasons. I mean, remember how I called out Mount Sinai for how they were sharing on Instagram their latest class of interns who were becoming obstetricians. And they asked them each to do like a little post on themselves on their Instagram page. Like, what's your favorite hobby? What do you love to do in your free time? Where did you grow up? And they were all almost entirely young women who were obstetricians, almost entirely young women. And all but one of them answered the question, why did you become an obstetrician? All but one of them said surgery. I've always wanted to be a surgeon. Surgery, exclamation point.
Right.
And one of them said to witness the miracle of a baby being born day after day. Well, there you go.
This is why birth doesn't belong in the institution of medicine, because they're coming at it from a medical perspective and it just doesn't belong there.
But how crazy. It's attracting people who want to be surgeons. It's attracting those people. Doesn't that tell you everything? This field needs surgery in it. It needs surgeons in this field. But if it's attracting people who want to do surgery, then there's way too much surgery. They should be drawn to some other line of medicine because this should be the one part of medicine where there's almost no surgery. They shouldn't all be flocking to obstetrics. All right. Anyway, I said we had to move fast, so I have to get off my little.
Well, we can't move on from skin to skin without just briefly touching on the work of Dr. Nils Bergman, because he is the one who is the forefront leader in this and coming up with some really incredible information. And most of his work has to do with low birth weight and preterm infants around the world, and how important skin to skin is for helping those babies thrive. But whatever is working for a low birth weight and preterm infant is also working for a full term healthy baby, right? So it's an enhancement. So his research compared low birth weight infants in incubators to those in continuous skin to skin contact, and he found that infants separated from their mothers showed a protest despair biological pattern, which means initial intense crying followed by shutdown, followed by hypothermia and a slowed heart rate to conserve energy. So this is what happens when babies are separated from their mothers. Infants kept in continuous skin-to-skin contact showed 10 times less crying. 10 times less crying than babies who were separated.
Sad. That is so sad.
So sad. That this does not just apply to preterm and low birth weight babies. This applies to all babies.
Mm-hmm.
In his study, infants that had skin-to-skin contact continuously were 100% stabilized within the 6th hour of life after birth, whereas less than half of the infants in incubators reached that same level of stability within 24 hours. 6 hours on the mother, 24 hours in an incubator.
Yeah.
That tells you everything.
It does.
So furthermore, his work emphasizes that skin-to-skin contact is not just about warmth and temperature regulation and bonding. It's about brain maturation and initial neural imprinting. The smell and the touch of the mother trigger the amygdala and prefrontal cortex, setting the foundation for a healthy emotional regulation and social development rather than a stress response. This is how we want all of our children to come into the world. So this is a really big one for me because in the hospital, they are just not getting it. They are still prioritizing weighing the baby, measuring the baby, examining the baby, rubbing the baby, bathing the baby, hatting the baby, blanketing the baby. All of these things they're prioritizing over that skin-to-skin contact with the mother and how impactful that is for their long-term health and well-being. We didn't even mention the microbiome. Right? We don't want babies getting exposed to other people's microbiomes after birth. We want it to be the mother and father's microbiome only.
So to the first point, I just want anyone listening to know that there are too many women listening who are going to feel guilty now or angry that it didn't go that way for their children, that they had a C-section or they had a C-section or a vaginal birth and the baby was taken away or the baby was in the NICU too long. we dedicated a really special episode to this topic of how to heal, how to restore your baby. And we did it with the On Track Baby sisters. They did 2 episodes with us. And this one was, I think it was like around late summer of, was it 2023 or 2024? Anyway, it was late summer of one of those 2 years. And one of those two sisters did have a cesarean section, and she had to do that healing with her own baby, but it always happens. I don't want anyone to feel like that ship sailed. You and your baby might have gone through a really hard time postpartum because you were not in contact, but the healing happens. And that whole episode is dedicated to how to do that, even if you've had the baby a long while back. So definitely take heart and listen to that, because it's okay. Like, your body is always ready to heal, just as it's always ready to be healthy. You and your baby are always ready to rebond. And if you bond beautifully in the hospital, you want that bonding to continue anyway. It's not like it's a one-shot deal.
No,
So, yeah,
we talked about that also in our episode with Greer on
yeah,
the
Kirschenbaum, yeah,
neuroscience. Yep,
this past
up
summer.
to up to 3 years. You know that just being in contact with your baby, sleeping with your baby.
Hmm.
There's plenty of time to restore that if you didn't get it early on. We also talked about it in the episode with Tony Hartman on the microbiome, and how if you didn't have a vaginal birth, there's still plenty of opportunity to help restore that microbiome. And skin to skin contact is one way, but if you didn't get it in the first week, you start it when you go home.
Right,
It's never too late, just
right.
as you said. But what we need to understand is that it needs to become a core principle of healthy birth that we protect the mother and baby remaining together instead of seeing it as a bonus or a special little golden hour. We have to see it as actually harmful to separate them. We have to change
So,
our paradigm around it.
yeah. So when you're interviewing a provider, especially if you're not birthing at home, definitely one of the questions you want to ask them, not only like, oh, we have whole episodes around this, so we don't need to get into it, but like questions to ask them around why they induce or why they have performed C-sections. But one of them is, what's the typical procedure after the baby comes out? Just like my doctor had said to me, well, you get your baby for a while and then we take the baby. That's the kind of question you want to ask now.
That's right.
Even if you can insist on keeping your baby, yes, you can legally, you still want to know that you're with someone who's knowledgeable and would not dare intervene in that process unless they had to.
I would go so far as to ask, how will you handle any gentle resuscitation that my baby might need after birth? Will you take my baby? Will you cut the cord? Or will you agree to help support the baby transition with the cord intact and on my body?
Right. Okay. What's
All
next?
right, next one. Okay, big one. Okay, the evidence is highly in favor of VBAC. So, one underutilized method of supporting physiologic birth, highly evidence based, is choosing a vaginal birth after a C section. The evidence says that for the majority of women with one previous C section, a VBAC is the safe and appropriate choice. The success rate of achieving a vaginal birth is approximately 60 to 80%. Now, we know it's actually higher than that if you have a provider who believes in VBAC and doesn't consider this a trial of labor, but actually believes that this is the right move for you. Because we see in women who are having home birth after a cesarean and HBAC that they have success rates over 90%.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't respect providers who say to a woman who's had a C-section, well, so what do you want to do this second time around? Do you want to schedule your C-section? Do you want to? They should care greatly about discouraging a woman from doing that, because statistically, it's so much worse for her and her baby. C-sections they're such a blessing when they're actually needed, and we keep muddying the waters by recklessly doing them.
Right. And the more C-sections you have, the more increased risk you have for chronic health issues as time goes on. The trade-off in choosing a repeat C-section is that you avoid the very small risk of uterine rupture, which is less than 1%. However, you increase the risk of things like infection, hemorrhage, complications in future pregnancies like placenta accreta or pelvic floor dysfunction, bladder dysfunction. There are so many things, and it's also an increased risk to the baby to be born by C-section rather than VBAC.
Yep.
So this one is still way underutilized. Most women are eligible, and the statistics are something like 13 to 15% of women are having them. Very small number.
Yep. But for the women who seek to have a vaginal birth, those numbers are very high. It's just they're discouraged at the first step.
That's right. Okay, number 5. This is an easy one. We all know this, but it's still worth talking about. Being upright and mobile in labor. Too many women are still centered in the bed when they are giving birth. The bed needs to become an abstract, distant part of the birth room. It's the focal point of a birth room. I tell mothers when they go to the hospital, throw all your crap on the bed. Make it difficult to get into bed. Treat it like it's the couch or the floor. Put all your stuff on it so you're not tempted to go in there and you have to go through an effort to get yourself into the bed. Because if at some point you actually do want to get in the bed, because you might get tired, you might want to take a nap, you might want to rest, that's fine. But it shouldn't be that you come into the room and you get put into bed and there you stay and there you give birth.
Treated like a patient. You've got to stop thinking about yourself as a patient, just as a client. It changes everything. A regular client would not belong laid up. But Trisha, why don't you tell everyone why it's so important to be out of the bed? It's not just because once you're there, they're more likely to tether you in some way, but the freedom alone is valuable. But tell them physiologically why this is so important. This is huge.
It's huge. It's major. It's game changing for birth. And again, it's like it's a barrier because of the way the hospital room is designed. And we have to recreate the space so that this can stop being such a barrier, because an upright position allows one, gravity. Hello, like how simple is that? Gravity to push your baby down and out. We need that. We need that. We need to use that to our advantage. Gravity is very, very important. That helps your baby descend. It puts the weight of the baby's head on your cervix, the weight of the baby's head on your cervix, and the pressure of the contraction with the gravity is going to make your cervix dilate and open. If you're on your back, you're on your side, you're not using gravity, your contractions have to work harder. You're taking away a really essential force in helping you. Upright positions also change the shape of the pelvis. That is what we need to get a baby to fit through. It's a tight fit. It's supposed to be a tight fit, but when you're upright, your pelvis can open by 2 centimeters more. That's huge. 2 centimeters is a ton. Yes, yeah. around 30%, up to 2 centimeters or so. That's a lot of space.
And what I always like to say when we talk about this is when you think about the pelvis and how it's designed to open at the point of the sacrum in the back, nature is, when you're pregnant, nature is expecting to have that space when it's bringing your baby through you. It's counting on that space. If you get in a bed and lie on your back, you're robbing yourself. You're intervening in the process that nature has laid out for you.
By being polite, because this is what the hospital wants you to do. They want to put you in the bed and you want to comply because the second we put on that hospital gown and we enter the room, we fall into the mentality of being a patient, just like you said. But the reason that the sacrum is designed to be mobile is so that when your baby's coming through, it can back up. It can move out of the way. It can open your pelvis. And if you're on a firm surface on your back in the bed, your sacrum can't do that. You're taking away that normal part of your beautiful human design that is meant to be able to move and accommodate your baby. Your baby has to navigate a tight little space, and they have to have as much room as possible to adjust their head position.
And they put women in those gowns that are open in the back. I mean, it seems so intentional. What woman is going to put on one of those gowns and just start walking around? I mean, you can wear whatever you want in labor. We have a whole episode, a really great one, and a Patreon event as well, where we talked, we covered like 20 or 20 something ways to make your hospital birth feel at home, but you don't have to wear the hospital gown. And it is gaping open in the back. And if that does, I hope you don't have self-consciousness in labor, but whether you're wearing that or not, when you're in the bed, if you do go in the bed for any reason, like you're resting or anything, you can be on your hands and knees in the bed. You can lie on your side in the bed. Get the vision of being laid up on your back out of your mind. Visualize something different, no matter where you are. Bed or not, you can be on your hands and knees. You can be standing with your feet on the floor and resting your palms on the bed and leaning forward. Anything where you're leaning forward, you're going to be so much more comfortable in the vast majority of any case.
Make it
Make,
undesirable. Make it messy. Take the sheets off. Move it into the corner of the room. To let your husband take a nap on it.
yeah.
Make it inaccessible.
Okay.
Anyway, the research shows very clearly in a large Cochrane systematic review that upright and mobile in labor shortens the length of labor and increases the chance of vaginal birth. Continuous one-to-one emotional support in labor. Throughout history, women have always been tended to by other women in labor, and there is a reason for that. And that is because it improves birth outcomes. And we have the evidence now to support that. The evidence for continuous labor support is among some of the most consistent and compelling in the research. The gold standard for this evidence is the Cochrane Systematic Review titled Continuous Support for Women During Childbirth, which analyzed 26 trials involving over 15,000 women. And it showed that women who received continuous labor support, especially from a doula, not necessarily from a nurse in the hospital, there was a distinction. They were 39% less likely to have a C-section. That's huge, 39%. 15% more likely to have a spontaneous vaginal birth, meaning without any intervention. 10% less likely to use any medications for pain relief. I would say anecdotally, that's a low, like the number is probably much higher than that.
I agree.
In the real world.
Absolutely agree.
31% less likely to report dissatisfaction with their birth experience. That number is probably also a lot higher, but this was just this one systematic review. But those are big, important numbers. Those are very statistically significant.
You said at the beginning of this that women always tended to women in labor, and you followed it with because it is safer. It is so much safer, but just back to what I said earlier about who belongs with women. They were with women throughout history because they belonged with women. Nobody even had a concept of what was safer. It was the natural response. And when you were talking, I had this completely fabricated vision in my mind of like a big family reunion and people of all different ages at this family reunion. And one of the 14-year-old girls, the niece of some, the granddaughter of some, gets her first period during the big family reunion and she's in the bathroom. Who's going to flock to her to support her, teach her, congratulate her, hug her, hold her? All the women are. It's the female cousins will, the aunts will, the mother will, the grandmother will. Because it makes sense. And it's the exact same thing with birth. We're just culturally conditioned to view this white coat as the person who belongs with us. But most of these people don't belong with women in labor. It isn't natural.
It's not our hormonal blueprint. It doesn't align with the hormonal blueprint and the physiology of birth. What aligns with that is women with women, making them feel safe, supported, relaxed, calm, understood. They've been through it.
And I don't count female obstetricians in this. They are sometimes the worst culprits in the whole industry. It's not, again, just like we said earlier about midwives versus obstetricians, it is not easy to assume a female doctor will necessarily tend to do better than a male. It's truly the model. In every patriarchy throughout history and every culture, there have been women playing a major role in upholding the patriarchy against other women. So I sometimes think about that when I think of obstetrics. It is complicated. But I just want to restore everyone to what is normal and natural and how the vast majority of all your ancestors birthed. Of course, there were other women with them, just like when they got their first periods. It would have been preposterous to have the fathers and the big brothers there if there were sisters and aunts and mothers around.
Let's just remember, what is the most important ingredient in physiologic birth?
Trust.
And what happens when we trust?
Endorphins.
And oxytocin.
Yeah, oxytocin is an endorphin. Yes, definitely.
Therefore, we have to create the space that releases the most oxytocin and endorphins. That is not when you have strangers and males in your presence.
Or abusive females, which we have heard a lot of.
Right. Well, here, gender is less important. You can trust a male. It's still obviously not kind of how it was done historically. And I think it's still a little bit against our brain, but you absolutely can have a trusting, safe relationship with a male, of course.
Of course.
And you can have a very untrusting, unsafe relationship with a female.
That's right.
But this is just kind of how it was done. Women supporting women, which is why there is such good evidence for doulas supporting women through birth and the midwifery model of care. Those births have the best outcomes.
I never had either parent with me during my births. It wouldn't have felt right to me to be giving birth in front of either of my parents. And I always felt equally close to both of my parents. And you would think that my mom would belong there first, but if I were forced, and again, I can't imagine having been undressed in front of my dad, anything like that. It was not ever going to be a part of our relationship, no matter what, if I was giving birth. But my dad would have been the parent who was so much more trusting in nature that emotionally and psychologically, he would have belonged with me before my mom. She was the nervous one. She was the one
Mm.
praying with eyes full of tears, massive relief after the baby was born. And for my dad, it was just joy after the baby was born. He had such a sense of trust that he could theoretically have served me in such a way more easily than my own mother. But what we were talking about was just that, that medical model, that system of controlling women. That's what we want to avoid.
That's why the evidence on doulas is so compelling because they trust birth.
Yeah.
So it would be really interesting if somebody did a study and looking at mothers or sisters supporting in women in birth versus doulas and what the outcomes were like there.
True.
And we are actually going to do an episode to talk about women who choose to have their mothers at birth or
Mm-hmm.
not. And it's going to be very fascinating to hear
Yep.
a wide range of feelings on that.
Yeah, we already got a bunch of voicemails about it, and we're going to do that episode soon.
Well, but just quickly before we move on from this one topic, I want to emphasize too that this isn't just about having a vaginal birth or a shorter labor or a safer birth. This also influences the outcome for the baby. So research actually shows that infants born to mothers with continuous support are 38% less likely to have low 5-minute APGAR scores below 7 and less chance of needing the NICU. So,
Unbelievable.
I mean, this is just like a no-brainer.
It's unbelievable that something like this can move the needle. It just shows you how much intervention is unnecessary. If it's something so basic, can change the statistics that easily, higher VBACs, fewer C-sections, fewer medical interventions, how could it be that easy? It just shows you how overused those things are.
Absolutely. So those were the 6 underutilized evidence-based methods for supporting safer physiologic birth. We're now going to touch on the 7 overused interventions that do not have evidence to support their routine use. The first one is routine IV fluids. I know you like this one a lot, so you can start.
You want me to talk about routine IV fluids?
Yeah.
I do. I normally have a lot to say about, but I don't know what you expect of me. Yeah, I mean,
But just say your feeling, just whatever
this
comes to
is
mind.
highly controversial. It looks very innocuous because it's just saline, but there are numerous side effects linked to giving a woman unnecessary fluids during her labor. Even just a hep lock not attached to anything changes things. So I'm anti-hep lock. I'm anti-fluids in labor without a very compelling reason. When hospital says it's hospital policy, we need to give you IV fluids, mainly that's to deprive you of drinking gastrointestinally the way you need to. But also, it's just one step closer to all their interventions. So when they're like, well, we just need the hep lock in, just let us put the hep lock in. I'm against that. I don't think that that's appropriate. I don't think it's evidence-based at all. And no one ever talks about the risks. I mean, it can go so far as to interfere with breastfeeding. It can inflate a baby's weight, which can
That's a very important one.
It can wreak havoc on the breastfeeding experience and the stress it can cause the mother. So this is just it. The problem with this one is it looks so innocuous. It
Right.
looks so very harmless. It's just fluids. What can go wrong? If there's not a reason to do something, don't do it.
The evidence is just not there to support it as routine use. And a hep lock is certainly better than being hooked up to an IV pole. That is obviously extremely restrictive. That is going to make you be forced into the bed, which is exactly where we don't want you. But I think one of the biggest risks is it does lead to an easier start to the cascade of interventions. It does change your mindset about your being a patient versus, being just a birthing mother in a hospital. And it leads to a lot of unnecessary intervention with early use of formula unnecessarily in babies because they had an exaggerated weight loss because you were inflated with extra fluids. Therefore, they were inflated with extra fluids. Therefore, when they diurese after birth, they have a birth percentage weight loss greater than the 10%, which is basically automatic. Your baby needs formula.
Exactly. It's one intervention leading to another, but who would ever think that that one leads to anything? No one ever thinks about that one as being risky, and that's havoc. when you're in that breastfeeding stage. It's tremendous stress. It's a tremendous unnecessary intervention if it goes that way. But just the anxiety alone, what happens to women when they're afraid of their baby's weights.
I recently suggested that if I were having a baby today, I would not weigh my baby until 24 hours later.
Wow.
And that is, and a lot of people were like, wait, why? I don't get that. What's the reasoning for that? Yes, it would be difficult to wait because, of course, right after birth, everybody's so curious. What did the baby weigh? What did the baby weigh? You want to know. I would want to know too. But I would still wait because it's an unnecessary separation between the mother and baby. And at home birth, it's generally not too risky, right? They weigh the baby right next to you and the baby goes right back to you. I still would want more continuous contact than that. But in the hospital, it could lead to an hour of separation.
Yeah.
It could lead to all kinds of other interventions. And it allows your baby to do some of that initial diuresing, especially if you had fluids in labor. So their weight is not so inflated.
Right.
Their weight right after birth is going to be a bit inflated no matter what.
Right.
Okay.
And then that's linked to other things. That's like the providers who say to the woman a couple years later, well, you have big babies. Remember, your baby weighed this. I mean, my daughter was born at 9'7" and she went down to 8'14". But if I had had fluids, she wouldn't have weighed 9'7". She might have weighed 9'11", 9'12". Right. We don't know. So there's so many ways that can work against women. It's misleading her and everyone else. Okay, next.
Okay, so highly overused, highly harmful, not evidence-based intervention. The flip side of intermittent auscultation is continuous electronic fetal monitoring. So while it is essential in high-risk labors that we talked about already, if you are having a non-physiologic birth, if you're having medications in labor, this is more important because obviously those medications are going to increase the risk to the baby, and we do want to have a better eye on the baby. But in low-risk birth, it is more harmful than helpful, more harmful than helpful. It requires you to be in the bed unless you get telemetry, which is an option. And if you do need continuous monitoring, I highly recommend that you get telemetry, which is the method for continuously monitoring a woman, but she can be mobile. So you're basically taking that monitor with you everywhere you go. It's not the same as being untethered, though. It's still something you got to drag around. It still limits where you go. You're not going to go up and down stairs as freely. You're not going to walk as much freely. You're not going to get in and out of the shower as freely. You're not going to move as freely. But it is a way better option if you do have to have continuous monitoring, which many births do. Okay, so decades of data show that continuous electronic fetal monitoring does not reduce the risk of infant death in low-risk women. It just doesn't. So we're not using it unless we have to.
It was never invented for low-risk women. It was created for high-risk women, just like ultrasound. Everything that's created ends up being applied to all women. They start these things just for the high-risk women, and without fail, it ends up applying to all women over time. Everything. Induction is another one. It was just for high-risk women. Now it's everyone. Okay, next.
So let me just state the data because I think it's important.
Next. Okay,
I know, we're running out of time. Okay, so the harm. A meta-analysis of 12 trials, 37,000 women found that continuous electronic fetal monitoring increased the risk of C-section by 63%.
Yep.
Huge. Yep. And it doesn't improve outcomes for babies.
Yep. It's usually false calls of fetal distress.
Right.
The number 2 reason for C-section in the United States.
So this is the most overutilized intervention in birth. So,
another one that appears harmless, right, Trisha? It doesn't.
It appears safe. It's like,
it appears
great, we're monitoring the baby more carefully. That's wonderful.
Right.
Who would want that?
Who wouldn't want that? Yep.
You shouldn't want that. You should not want that.
Right.
Okay. Big one, routine induction of labor at 41 weeks. So now this has moved back a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Now it's 39 and it's moving toward 37.
It was 42 before, and that was evidence-based. At 42, the risk of stillbirth doubles. There's a few different studies on this. Back then, it went from like 3 to 6 in the numerator. Now, I think it goes from like 17 to 33 out of 10,000. That was the one where they drew the line because they just said, all right, at 42 weeks, going from 42 to 43 weeks, women can go to 44 weeks. That's where they drew the line. But yeah, you and I have witnessed it. I remember the decade after that they would say 41 and a half. Oh, we stop at 41 in 3 days. That's where we induce. That's where it makes sense to induce. Then they moved to 41. And now you and I see a very new trend. They're going back to 39. And we have a whole episode on all that and a whole event on the Arrive trial and how poor it was and how misleading it was and how they manipulated the answers on that and tricked people about the outcome on that. Very poor study. Even ACOG said it had to be redone. Now you and I are hearing even up to 37, right? In one of our recent episodes, I shared a story about a woman who was induced. They wanted to do a C-section at 37 weeks. This is what they've gone full circle, despite all the research. All right. Well, we have a lot of episodes on induction. We have a lot of Patreon events on induction, on Pitocin. But in my opinion, if you're pregnant, this should be a very, very hard sell. It should be very hard to convince you to be induced. There are times it makes sense, but they better demonstrate to you that induction makes much more sense than continuing to remain pregnant. For example, if you have preeclampsia, remaining pregnant is very risky if you have severe preeclampsia. That's one example. It's probably the top one you and I always think of because there are not many. There are not many good reasons to induce a woman and a baby.
Yes, and we specifically went through all of the reasons. I don't believe that was a regular episode. I believe that was a Patreon episode.
Yes, we did do a couple on this in Patreon. Yeah. Yep.
The number 4 reason for overuse of intervention in labor that is not evidence-based is strict labor parameters following the old Friedman curve. Strict labor parameters lead to a diagnosis of failure to progress, which is the leading cause of C-section. Fortunately, ACOG has finally come to their senses and now considers a woman to be in active labor at 6 centimeters instead of 3 or 4, which is what it was before, which is a huge move in the right direction. I still don't believe in any time parameters whatsoever on labor, but the fact that we have moved the bar out to 6 centimeters is huge because previously women were expected to dilate a centimeter an hour and you were considered in active labor at 3 centimeters. And many women aren't even close to being in labor at that point. And many of women have had unnecessary diagnosis of failure to progress because of those tight time frames.
Well, as I always say, don't let anyone turn this art into a science.
That's absolutely right. Why were you even checking the cervix anyway? Why do we even need to know these numbers? There's a lot that you can know about a woman in her progress in labor without checking her cervix. If you watch a woman, if you understand enough about the physiology of birth and you have seen enough physiologic birth, you will know. You don't need to ever put your hands inside her cervix to know that she's progressing or to know that it's time to push or to know that her baby is about to be born.
Yep. And the duration of a woman's labor tells you nothing about the outcome of her birth. For women who take longer to give birth, it doesn't tell you about their outcome. It doesn't indicate a different outcome. It's just a longer, slower labor, period.
But the thing I really want women who are having hospital birth to understand from this conversation is that you are not even considered to be in active labor before that 6 centimeter mark. So there are no time frames that should be put upon you. And really, we don't want them after either. But this is still something that I think is not fully implemented in hospital birth, and women are still being told that they need Pitocin, they need augmentation, they need to move things along, they're moving too slowly. And that just starts that whole cascade of interventions. Okay, this is an easy one. There's not that much to say on it because it's so obvious. The routine use of episiotomy. This is not evidence-based whatsoever.
How much do you think this is still happening?
I think it probably depends on location and practice. I think in some hospitals, the rate is still very high.
Yeah, shame on them.
I mean, you're just being negligent. You're just being negligent if you don't understand that there is zero evidence to support the routine use of episiotomy. And the use of it really should be restricted to emergency scenarios only where the next step is cesarean, right? Maybe an episiotomy can save you from an emergency C-section. That's about it. That is about the only scenario where it would ever be okay. It is a harmful intervention. It does not reduce the risk of severe tearing. It increases the risk of severe tearing.
Yep.
It increases the risk of pelvic floor dysfunction. It increases the risk of pain and discomfort you can't even imagine how much that pain and discomfort postpartum impacts your ability to breastfeed your baby. You can't sit on your bottom.
Plus
You can
infections,
hardly
painful
move.
sex more than doubles the rates of UTIs after birth. Can you imagine that? Yes. This is like there are easy ones and there are tricky ones. This is just an easy one.
This is an easy one. Even the major health organizations, ACOG, WHO, the NICE guidelines, they state now that episiotomies should never be routine. They should only be used in specific emergency situations. Emergency situations. All right. Your favorite one, number 6, amniotomy.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Another extremely common overused procedure in modern obstetrics that does not have the evidence behind it to support its use. It does not speed up labor.
It has evidence to discourage its use. It's dramatically linked to worse birth outcomes, more painful births, much higher rates of C-section, malpositioned babies. I just find
More
it
pain,
I
more pain in
find it
labor.
to be disrespectful on top of it, like an episiotomy is. I find it to be, I don't know if the word is arrogant. There's something about it that really bugs me. Like where a provider says, well, it's time to break your water. Oh, really? Really? It's time? Like you're the one to declare it's time. How about the body and the baby declares when it's time? I can't get over how presumptuous it is for a provider to say, it's time to break your water. Oh, really? You just have this magic skill in knowing the perfect moment it should happen. Well, if it were the perfect moment, it would be happening. And there's no
Well,
point by which, I want women to know this, there's no point by which your membranes should have released. You can't go so far down the birth where it's like, oh no, they didn't release yet. They can stay intact till the baby is out and fully in the amniotic sac. It will almost definitely release before that point. I think that happens 1 in 1,000 times. It's very cool, but it never has to be broken, and it causes all kinds of harm. I just, it's this is
it
the no brainer of no brainers to me. This
the
one,
interesting thing though is it is still included in the routine protocol for augmentation of labor.
which
So
is
if there
crazy
is
because ACOG
concern,
says they shouldn't do it anymore.
but they still
They're
have
kind of,
it. They still have it in for a diagnosis of arrest of labor in the first stage. ACOG requires that a woman meet the following criteria. She must be 6 centimeters dilated. Her membranes must have be ruptured, and she has failed to progress despite 4 hours of adequate uterine activity or 6 hours of pitocin. So they
well,
still require
the
it.
way I hear it differently. And you're the clinician, and maybe you are hearing it right. But the way I hear that is, if I were an obstetrician and I were looking at those guidelines, I would ask myself if her membranes have already naturally released, and if they have, and all those other criteria are met, then it would be what they call arrest of labor. I,
No,
I
they would
don't
rupture
consider that.
them. They would rupture them,
That
and
doesn't
then they would,
count though to me. Then how can you call it the diagnosis if that's not the natural condition, right?
because it would be the last step in seeing if she could progress.
Okay.
Now we'll
Yeah, I
rupture your
mean,
bag of water and see if you still don't progress.
it
So
gives them permission to, that's for sure.
that's right. But it's not evidence based to shorten labor, and it comes with risk. It increases the risk of fetal distress. It increases the risk of umbilical cord prolapse. Now, there's some nuance there because it depends on, there's certain scenarios where that risk is increased and other scenarios where it's a less of a risk.
Thank you for using the word nuance well.
Did I?
It's a great word. Well, everyone's overusing the word nuanced lately, and
No,
I'm always
I
getting
don't
all
use
like,
that one much.
everyone's
Let's
always
sit
like,
there.
it's a very nuanced discussion, and you
Oh.
actually just used it perfectly well. Yes, it was very nice. I'm always rolling my eyes at how everyone's using that word all the time. They call
Oh,
everything a
just
nuanced
like the
discussion.
overuse of pivot and narcissist and
Pivot. You know the
um,
scene in Friends, right? Oh, you don't know it. Of course you don't. There's a
probably don't.
hilarious scene from Friends where Ross says the word pivot. Everyone should go look that up, but everyone already knows it. I have to
Okay,
send it to
I do not like that one.
you. That what? The word
Gaslighting.
pivot?
That's another one.
Guys, well, that's a real thing. I'm okay
Yeah,
with
but
that
people
word.
way overuse it. It's a real thing. So is nuance. So is pivot.
I'm so
Just use it
glad.
carefully. Don't overuse it.
Exactly. Things get
It's a good word.
overused
It
and
makes
they get
sense.
cliche. Right.
It
Well,
just becomes cliche.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, go on.
Okay.
Sorry for the
Anyway.
interruption.
Okay. So cord prolapse is nuanced. Okay. Increased risk of infection. This is very real. Okay. You break your bag of water, your risk of infection goes up immediately.
Yeah.
And increased maternal pain. And what is not on here, which should be, is increased risk of malposition of the baby.
Absolutely. They can drop asynclitic. Yep. What about GBS
Or
positive? Oh, go ahead.
not drop, they can just have the inability to move out of
Right.
asynclitism.
Yeah, they can drop down lower without water, without that resource to be able to move freely and tuck their little chin and be put in that position because we robbed them, there's that word again, of their resource of water, which they were using to move around. Trisha, what if a woman is GBS positive? Isn't that even like further risk if they're releasing the membranes of a woman who's GBS positive?
Yes, because it increases the risk of the baby contracting GBS. But
Very serious.
her risk of getting an infection is the same whether she can just as easily get an infection without GBS. But the risk of the baby getting GBS infection is higher.
Exactly. That's what we were concerned about. GBS
Right.
early onset disease. Yep.
All right. Finally, number 7. So easy to understand. So much common sense behind this. Do we really need evidence to prove this? No. But do we because otherwise practices don't change? Yes.
I'm sorry,
The
what's number
harm,
7? I'm not following. Can you
sorry,
say it?
I just had to really lead up to
I had
it
to say a few things about
because
it
it's
first.
such,
Just tell us
it's
what it
such
is.
common sense to
What is
me.
it? Gosh, should I
Okay,
guess?
now you have to
No.
guess.
Now, how can
Come
I
on. Common sense.
give me a hint
Second stage.
related to pushing?
Yes.
Um,
The use of force or directed pushing.
oh yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Pushing on somebody else's terms, not pushing with your body, not pushing physiologically.
Right.
Um, this is not helpful. And this is how birth has been managed in the hospital for a very long time. Um, I think it might be changing a little, but it doesn't help. It increases the risk of the baby having heart rate abnormalities, deoxygenating the baby. It increases the risk of pelvic floor and perineal damage.
Yeah.
It increases the risk of maternal fatigue and stress. Purple
Yeah.
pushing. We've all seen women whose eyes are been completely bloodshot from pushing so hard,
Yep.
popped veins in their face. I
Yep.
mean, it's absurd. This is not necessary. Your body knows how to push your baby out. You do not have to force it.
Yeah, I think that there are two reasons that they've gotten away with this and this has become the norm. One is that so many women get epidurals and therefore they have to be coached and guided. So that's going to
But
happen
they
with
don't.
right.
They think they do, but they don't.
Right, right. Well, let's put it this way. So many women get epidurals and then they can't feel anything anymore. So they turn to their providers for guidance on getting their babies out. And second, there's so many women who've never given birth before and they just are so in the mindset of quote not knowing how to do this and I've never done this before, and most nurses or doctors are all too happy to sweep in like the experts, like, okay, here's what I want you to do. Here's what I want you to do. Like, grab your knees, pull them, all these random arbitrary things like grab your knees and pull them up, or hold your breath and count to 10, or hold your breath and count to 3, or breathe like this, or puff, puff, puff your exhale. It's ridiculous. And I just want women to know one thing that should settle all of this. Your baby is going to come out with or without your participation. Therefore, there's nothing you have to do. If you're having a physiologic birth, just listen to your body because you very well may have an irrefutable urge to bear down and like you, that's not a decision you make. That's just happening. If it happens, go with it. But some women just rest there very easily and the babies just slip out gently. So there's nothing you have to do. And that's, I think, the key premise to why this practice has taken hold of everyone telling women how to push their babies out.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right that it has come a lot from the use of epidurals and the eagerness to get a baby out and the timeframes that ACOG put on normal second stage. Oh, if you're a second time mom, you know, it's a prolonged second stage if your labor takes more than 2 hours or 1 hour or whatever they used to say. I mean, it's just absurd. Your uterus will push your baby out, like you said, whether you do anything to work with it or not. And if you are unmedicated, you're most likely going to feel it. We do have some reports of women who haven't felt it at all, which is unusual, but can happen. Most women feel it quite intensely and want to work with it, and their body naturally works with it. And that's the best way to do it for you and your baby. But if you do have an epidural, you don't actually have to do anything. Your uterus will keep contracting, the baby will come out. especially if you're off your back. But if you have an epidural and you want to work with it, you can turn that epidural down so you can get a little bit more sensation to work with your baby. So the other thing is that it's normal when you are fully dilated for there to be a pause. We don't have to start pushing the second we're 10 centimeters. We don't even need to know we're 10 centimeters. We don't even need to know we're fully dilated. As your body is ready, it will start to move down into the pelvis further through the cervix, and you'll feel the sensation and the natural urge to push. Lastly, there's a lot of pressure that once the baby's head is out, to get the rest of the baby out immediately or get the baby born in one single push. Okay, here comes the head. Now the head should be immediately followed by the shoulders and the body. That is not how normal physiologic birth works. Sometimes, yes, that happens. Sometimes babies come flying out really quickly, and it all does seem to happen in one contraction. And if that happens naturally, that's normal and good for your baby and your body. But if the head needs some time to rest and the body needs some time to rotate within the pelvis to get the shoulders out safely, you need to give it that time. You don't want to force push through that. That is how damage happens to the perineum. And that is probably a reason for a lot of shoulder dystocias that we actually cause.
Yeah. And before the head is out, I think there should be some understanding of how the vaginal tissue needs to unfold and gently open to allow the baby to come through. This happens as a gentle process. It's making way for the baby. So this whole notion that if a woman were to push well enough or hard enough or effectively enough would just make it happen, would get the baby out, there's not an understanding that the body needs time to allow for it as well. So you can't necessarily push through that tissue that hasn't unfolded yet.
That's how you tear.
That's how tearing can happen. That's right. That's right. Just more trust, more respect. I think so much of it is about respecting the process, respecting your precious body. Just knowing it's happening, it's on the way. And it's very hard to be patient and it's very hard to be trusting. But that's really our job. That's our challenge. That's what surrender means. That's really the big challenge of it all.
So that's where we begin. We begin with trust in ourselves. And then we learn to choose the people to surround us in birth who we feel safe and trusting with. That's the second step. And the third step is to arm yourself with a certain amount of knowledge, which if all you do is learn what we just talked about today around what the evidence support and doesn't support, you are already on the path to your safest and best birth.